Hey guys, welcome to Coffee with Gish. So today I'm going to talk about anti-Mormonism. Yeah, that's right. There is a phenomenon known as anti-Mormonism, and that's the effort out there to make Mormonism look as bad as possible. And in itself, it's actually very fascinating, right? Why? First of all, the fact that it exists. I mean, the fact that you have all of these people out there motivated to make the LDS Church and to make Mormonism look as bad as it possibly can. And, you know, I think it's partly provoked by the fact that Mormonism is, after all, kind of unusual. So it's probably, you know, kind of easy to attack it for that reason. It's not the norm. There's so many things about Mormonism that are different from your average Protestant, go to church on Sunday type of church. I mean, both Mormons and Protestant Christians believe in God. They both use the Bible. They both believe in Jesus and in his atoning sacrifice, that Jesus died on the cross to save us from our sins. So if you just look at the most basic elements of Mormonism, there's a lot of overlap with Christians around them. But it's the differences that cause the problems. It's the fact that they have these other strange scriptures. And, you know, they're not just scriptures like, okay, we actually read the Apocrypha in the Bible and not just, you know, the books in the regular Protestant King James Bible. No, it's the fact that they have scriptures that were revealed to the prophet Joseph Smith, the Book of Mormon, translated from the gold plates. I mean, the further I go on, immediately I hope you see, wow, you're going to get into trouble. Wow, you're going to have opposition. There's just no denying that this is going to be a problem. Because let's face it, when it comes to religious stuff, there's this weird tension between what is respectable that most people do, and then the weird stuff that people believe. And that tension exists because, honestly, even the things that the mainstream believe would be considered from another perspective pretty darn odd. I used to love to listen to this particular song by the artist Laurie Anderson, but in it she talks about how growing up, she heard adults telling Bible stories, and she said they were the most amazing, unbelievable stories, and yet all the adults around her believed these stories and talked about them like they really happened. And, you know, these are stories like Jonah and the whale, or Jesus healing the sick, that kind of thing. So, you know, but honestly, most of us are inured to the unusualness of these things because they belong to our dominant culture. Now, veer away from them and you're going to pay a price. And anti-Mormonism is the price that Mormons pay to believe their particular brand of unusual and frankly kind of unbelievable stuff. And I say that as someone who was raised Mormon, okay? So my idea about religion is, you know, religion does demand that you place faith in things that are incredible. And most religions do. But most of them have some aspects that, you know, looked at in the cold, hard light of day are going to look kind of odd. But Joseph Smith made some remarkable claims back in his time, that he found these gold plates, that an angel showed them to him, that he translated them by the gift and power of God. And then he, on top of that, he did some weird things. He practiced polygamy. he was crowned king of the kingdom of God on earth. And, some of this stuff started to come out. In fact, there was a newspaper set up, the Nauvoo Expositor, that was designed specifically to reveal some of these weird things that Joseph Smith was up to. And Joseph Smith probably hastened the day of his demise when he had that newspaper press destroyed. How did I encounter anti-Mormonism growing up? Well, for me, it was as a kid. I realized that people thought Mormons were weird and funny. And I realized this just by listening to kids around me in school talk about how weird and funny Mormons were. They would make jokes about how many kids Mormons had. Or I have once told you the story about about waiting for the bus. And while I was waiting for the bus, this boy up the road from me started telling me about Joseph Smith translating the Book of Mormon with a rock in his hat. And I was scandalized. And I said, no, you have no idea what you were talking about. And it turned out that he knew exactly what he was talking about. And it was I who had no idea what I was talking about, because honestly, that's not the kind of thing they taught children in church, in their what they called primary classes. The children's organization was called Primary, and we all went to Primary, and we learned fun songs and learned basic stories about the Bible or the Book of Mormon or church history, but we weren't learning about Joseph Smith translating the Book of Mormon by looking at a rock in his hat. And that, that's true, that he did look at what he called a seer stone in his hat, and that was the medium of translation. I mean, already as I'm saying this, I'm like, red lights are going off and sirens are sounding, and I know that immediately we're in territory that sounds weird and is designed to get me in some kind of hot water with regular people who who are regular because they don't believe in that brand of weirdness. They just believe in some other brand of weirdness that they have invested their lives in. And then actually, now that we're talking about anti-Mormonism, is one of the main reasons I clashed with Christians, Protestant Christians usually, when I was a missionary, because they talked about, oh, you guys think you can become gods. And, I was not the most savvy theologian out there, and I didn't at the time know Greek like I know it now, or Latin, or I hadn't studied ancient Christianity that much, but I had read passages of some church fathers who did talk about deification. So I'd armed myself a little bit, and I said, well, I'm sorry, but you're the one who doesn't know what you're talking about, oh person who has imbibed anti-Mormon literature. This is actually a thing. And, we would argue about it and argue to a standstill, where they were basically saying to me, well, okay, we can see where you're coming from. We don't agree with you, but yeah, I see what you're saying. It doesn't sound as stupid anymore. Pick a religious tradition, spend some time with it, and eventually you're going to see why people came to the conclusions they came to. But when you first encounter their beliefs and ideas, you may be shocked and think, well, how on earth could anyone believe that? Walk a mile in another person's shoes, and then you can start to see things a little bit differently. That doesn't mean we have to believe what other people believe, but what bugs me is the fact that people are so vicious to each other about their different, unusual beliefs. And anti-Mormonism is a phenomenon that really seeks to excite fear and horror about Mormonism. And in the past, I think less so today, thank goodness. There are wonderful people out there like Bridget Jack Jeffries and Steve Pinnaker and a lot of other people, Richard Moo. probably pronouncing his name incorrectly, Mouw, who have looked at Mormonism seriously, tried to understand it from a Protestant, Christian, and evangelical perspective, and they're not really trafficking in anti-Mormonism, but they don't agree with Mormonism. And I think that's fine. Now, I don't consider it anti-Mormon if you just say, well, these are the reasons we believe what we believe, and these are the reasons why we don't believe what Mormons teach. I think that's perfectly legit. But it's when people take a sort of tabloid yellow journalism position and they try to horribilize others, exoticize them, distort their views beyond recognition, that I have a problem. And that's what I think anti-Mormonism is. So let's talk a little bit about that. What does it look like on the ground? Well, there are movies made that claim that Mormonism is satanic, and emphasize things like the most outlandish takes on what you might think Mormons might have believed or taught, whether in the past or the present. And here I'm talking about a movie, an infamous movie called The Godmakers, but it's one of many. I mean, there's a whole cottage industry, or there was a whole cottage industry out there to prejudice people against Mormonism. And there were speakers and films and books, and people made good money arguing that Mormonism is a cult, it's satanic or demonic, and stay far away from this evil thing. And I used to go as a missionary to Christian bookstores, and I would find the anti-cult section, and there would be Mormon stuff. Here are the anti-Mormon book publications filled with a lot of tripe stuff that was sensationalized, and there was a cost to it. All right, there's a real cost to this kind of material for Mormons, because it doesn't help when you're out there in the world and people think that you're, fooled by Satan or possessed by demons, and you've been bamboozled, and you're stupid or just beyond the pale morally. When I was a young guy knocking on doors as a missionary, and I would get some really nasty receptions, and one of the worst, this is not fit for children's hearing, so please don't, take children out of the room if they're in the room when you're listening to me now. I remember knocking on one door, and this woman, just with hatred in her eyes and hatred in her voice, looked at me and she said, "Just because some teenage boy had a wet dream in the field doesn't mean I have to listen to you." And then she just slammed. Now, she may have been a perfectly fine person, a decent human being. And yet, at that moment, she was, the hatred possessed her. She was possessed with hatred, right? I'm not going to say she was possessed by demons, but she was definitely taken over by her hatred of Mormons. And where did that come from? Well, that came from being exposed to anti-Mormon literature. Now, I actually happen to know some anti-Mormons, or people who would say, I'm not anti-Mormon. In other words, I'm not against the people, the Mormon people, but I'm anti-Mormonism because I teach against Mormonism and I publish against Mormonism. And probably my favorite person who fits into this category is Sandra Tanner, who used to run Utah Lighthouse Ministries and had a bookstore in downtown Salt Lake. She is the nicest person you'd ever want to meet, a charming person, a kind person. She's an ex-Mormon who found Jesus, I guess you could say, which is, it's kind of odd for, when I think about that, because one can, of course, be a follower of Jesus within Mormonism, and Mormons are followers of Jesus, but the argument from the opponents of Mormonism is that it's another Jesus. It's not the right Jesus, and it's another Jesus because, and this is the argument, and I think you have to take it seriously at least, even if you don't agree with it, is that, hey, there's a Jesus in the Book of Mormon, and that Jesus speaks, and there are ideas of that Jesus, and they don't necessarily correspond to traditional, orthodox, mainstream Christian teaching. Okay, now that's a serious issue. And so, Christian scholars and theologians and seminarians, if they examine Mormonism, they can look at the portrayal of Jesus and Christianity in the Book of Mormon, and they can say, well, this is how it differs from mainstream Orthodox Christianity. I actually think there's, in a way, a good service that's performed there, because, Mormon ideas wouldn't be the foundation of a different religion or a different Christianity if they were the same old thing as the regular old Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant Christianity. Catholicism. I remember going into Christian bookstores in California in the late 1980s and as a missionary, and seeing anti-Catholic books for sale in Christian bookstores. I thought it was bonkers. Catholicism is the largest, by numbers, the largest Christian denomination in the world. And you had Protestant Christian bookstores selling anti-Catholic literature. It's very American. And Mormonism has been thrown into that same category of awfuls with Catholicism, Freemasonry, and Mormonism is just thrown in there too. It's false, it's satanic, and it's the kind of thing that, frankly, the good old believing Christian KKK people would have been worked up about in their hatred of everything that was different. So there's also a troubling past here. But it's that hatred of others, that distortion of others and their lives, that fomenting fear of others that we see in this dark corner of American Christianity and even in Mormonism. But here's the thing, when it comes to Protestant Christian / KKK style opposition to the cults, Mormonism hasn't really had its own cottage industry of opposition to these different groups. Now, Christians will say, well, you didn't have to have one because the whole basis of your doctrine and the reason you exist is that Joseph Smith claimed he was told by God that the creeds of Christianity are an abomination in the sight of God. That exists in Joseph Smith history, in the scriptures, Joseph Smith's account of his first vision, where he hears the voice of God tell him that the creeds of Christianity are an abomination in his sight. And that's true, and that's a divisive message. And somehow, though, it never took the form of a publishing house, cottage industry, filmmaking. Here are the evils of Protestant Christianity that we're going to sell you in a bookstore or a movie house, that it became for Christians. There was never a circuit of speakers coming around regularly telling you how evil mainstream or Protestant Christianity is, or Catholicism or anything like that. Mormonism just doesn't have that phenomenon. So it is I think very much part of American Protestant culture. I think it's a dark part of it, Mormonism, but I think there is this cumulative effect where it becomes okay to be mean to some people because they're different, and so they become the targets of more casual acts of violence. So, and here I say this, and I take part in a board where there's a lot of criticism of Mormonism, and I'm not always comfortable with all of that criticism. I know where some of it's coming from, and I think people, as they leave a faith and they're trying to reconcile with their past selves, put their former beliefs in the right perspective, or distance themselves from who they were, there's a real emotional and psychological struggle, and embracing anti-Mormonism seems to be a part of that phenomenon. That in a way, some of the best anti-Mormons are ex-Mormons or post-Mormons, because they know where the skeletons are buried. They've learned about these intimate details, uncomfortable details about their former faith as they've left, and they've heard the uncomfortable facts sometimes from people like Sandra Tanner, who was in this ministry for a purpose, a ministry designed to get people out of Mormonism and get them to convert to what she views is the real Christianity, the true Christianity. But here's my point of view on all of that. As much as I like Sandra Tanner, as much as I like many of her associates, some of whom do excellent scholarship, I'm thinking particularly of Ronald Huggins, I just have a real discomfort with people who, not with people, it's not the people so much, because they're great people, but I have a discomfort with the activity of tearing other religions down. I just do. I don't think it's the hallmark of a pluralistic society, and in my view, I want this to be a pluralistic society. I want this to be the kind of place where Mormons and Protestant Christians, Mormon Christians, Protestant Christians, Catholic, Orthodox, atheist, UFO religions, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, everybody can be peacefully rubbing shoulders in the public square, belonging to the same organizations, working for the common good, and that works out well. I don't think that these anti-cult ministries of the kind, and I'm not talking about people who study small religious groups led by charismatic leaders, new religious movements as a sociological or religious studies, and I think that there is some kind of virtue to the scholarly study of high-demand small religious groups led by charismatic leaders, otherwise commonly known as cults. But that's not what anti-cult ministries are. I think anti-cult ministries, though well-intended and designed to keep these Protestant Christians in the Protestant fold and not have their people fall prey to what they believe are satanic or demonic influences. But as the end result, or one of the end results, maybe unintended negative consequences, is that it breeds a lot of suspicion, fear, and hatred. So, thank you, and I'll see you next time on Coffee with Kish. Take care.